Morning everyone. This video is in response to a professional pockets workshop that I did at Didn't Stitch Spring 22. So there were some questions which the students had which I wasn't able to address in the time that we have, and I promised them I'd do them a video. So I did tell you it was me and my phone and my ironing board, so we could have a number of interesting sections here, but I think I'm all ready to go. So let's have a look at where we got to. This is what we did. We drew our box, and then what we did is we cut along these lines and cut into the corners and then turned it through and put our lips on. And as we did that, a few of you asked about adding an extra piece of material. And I'd said at the time I didn't add the extra piece of material while you were learning the technique because I had everything cut so that everything would line up nicely so you could get a hang of the technique. Putting another piece of material on can help to secure the corners, make it a more robust job, and I said I would do a video about that part of it. So this is that. So I've drawn my box and I've got another piece of fabric underneath which is bigger than the box, which I'm going to sew on and post through. So before I've cut anything, I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and sew exactly on that line all the way round, and I might even be able to show you that. Or maybe not. You won't believe how long it takes to just set up one phone in a different position. Anyway, here we go. I'm going to sew this box for you. I don't know what value there is in you watching me sew it, but you never know. So if I can find the pedal, which is probably miles away because the sewing machine was somewhere else 10 minutes ago, I'm just going to sew this. And putting my hand there isn't going to help, is it? Okay, let's go. So I started, as I suggested to you, I started part way down one of the long sides, and I'm trying to be very, very accurate about the corner. Can I show you? Oh gosh, this probably wasn't a wise idea. It's getting worse, not better, isn't it? So I'm at the corner here. See that? There, right near the corner. Hands in the way. And I'm going to hand turn it because if you can see that it's going to miss the corner, so that's gone right in the corner. That's gone right in the corner. If you feel it's going to miss the corner, then just before your needle goes in, you can lift your foot, alter it the tiniest little amount, put it down, and then roll it down again, and then it will go in the corner. It doesn't show that very well, does it? I'm sorry. So turn round. The other thing which is quite useful is when you go down this short side is to count the stitches, because when you get to the other end it should be the same amount of stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I just want to be really sure about that one. 8. I think I've been quite lucky. This isn't great TV, is it? So down the other side. I'm going to do this quicker because it's not a lot of fun for you to watch. And that's, can I get it? I can't really want to get it in there, and no, it's not going, is it? To show you the corners, I can't get it. I can't get the phone close enough to show you me winding it into the corners, but you get the gist. You're all used to using a sewing machine anyway. You probably know about that anyway already. Okay, threads out the way, and to finish off, I'm just going to stitch over the stitches that I started with. There we we go. And hopefully you can see that I've sewn round that square and I've got the other fabric pinned on the back. And look, I did think about making my bobbin a different colour for you so that you'll be able to see it. So now you're going to have to hold on a second while I change the camera around so that I can show you what it looks like and demonstrate the next bit. So thanks for your patience. Here we go again. Okay, we're good to go again. So now you can see my finished stitched there. So on this is the right side of the garment, and it has a piece of fabric. This is thin cotton lawn. Organza's good. I think we went through that. Organza's good. Organdie is not, because it's polyester. It doesn't iron so well. So that's what it looks like on the right side of the fabric, and this is where all my markings are, and I've sewn exactly round the box. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to cut it as we did on the day, and I'm cutting through both layers, both this garment layer and this thin fabric layer, and then I'm going to post that through the hole. So I'm just going to give you a moment while I cut it out and come back when I have done so. Right, let's show you. Here it is, cut. You can even see my scissors. Let's get those out of shot and that out of shot. Okay, so it's now got a hole through all layers, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this fabric from the right hand side. Where's that come from? My life is full, probably on yours, of extraneous thread. Okay, so I'm going to get this and I'm going to post it through that hole that we cut. It's hard to do it without getting my hands in the way. Take the pins out, that's a good idea on it. So all of that has gone through to the other side. Nearly. Seems like a pin there, doesn't it? Okay. So on the front, you will see the gap as we had before. You might see a tiny bit of the fabric we've posted through, and so it's a really good idea that that fabric that you post through is similar to your garment fabric, because there is the chance, until you get super duper good at it, that you will see a little bit of it. So really that's how we were before in class, with the window and all the seam allowances poked through to the other side. I'll finger press this in the hope that it will, I can turn it over for you in a second. But instead of just turning the seam allowances back on the garment, we've pushed through another layer of fabric. So I'm going to turn it over now. Hopefully it's not too bouncy. We turn it over now, and this is what it looks like on the back. That should be exactly on the line there. Okay. And then now we're back to where we were, and we sew our lips in. Now the complication that we have now, which is why I didn't do it in the class, is that you can't see your seam allowance. Do you remember the lips lined up exactly with this seam allowance under here? Do you remember we just had this bit turned in, and we attached the lips to here using those raw edges as a guide, and then we stitched along this section here, which now has stitching on it. So you need to just be careful where you stitch. I would say, which side we want to stitch? Let me have a think about that. That's exactly on the line. If I stitch the lips this side slightly, slightly. It's going to come through the other side. So you have to stitch it very, 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 very slightly, the lips, to this side of the stitching. Because if you stitch exactly in the same place, it's my view that you're perforating that line more and actually weakening it. So I would put the lips on and stitch very, very, the tiniest amount towards the seam allowance. But the difficulty you now have, unless you've got, I mean, if you've got organza here, you'll be able to see through it better than this. This is cotton lawn, it's black because I wanted to for you to be able to see on the video it is a piece quite easily. And I will need to now line my lips up with, I can feel it in there, there's no feeling on video is there, I can feel in there where the edge of the seam allowance is. Also, remember when we drew the central line in the very beginning, let's move this over a little bit. When we drew the central line in the very beginning, we continued it out so that we could find it again. And if this fabric were slightly shorter, you'd still be able to see it, and then you use that to line your lips, centre of your lips up with that line. I think personally that is easier said than done. I find it quite difficult to line the centre up with this line and then pin it in place and stitch it so that stitch it in there so that it stays true, which is why when I taught you to cut the lips at the right size and line it up with this here, because personally I found that gave me more chance of getting the lips in the middle. But as I said to you at the time, you have to try and work out what works best for you, because you might find that you have no issues with that. You know, we're all kind of different with our dexterity and skills and whatever. So I'm just going to take a moment now to sew some lips together. I have them here. They're not sewn together yet. And if I remind you what went on here, I put them together. I actually ironed a crease down the middle so I could see where the middle was. And I stitched them together down the middle. And then I ironed them so that they kissed, I think is how I described it. And that becomes your lips. They go in the centre of the hole, and you can see now it's slightly more difficult to work out where they go because I haven't got vision of that behind. It's not impossible. You can use your fingers. You can use this line here to help you, but it just adds just another fiddle. So what I'm going to do now is just sew these up. I'm not going to put your camera on the sewing machine again. I don't think that worked very well. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a pause while I sew those together, and we'll come back and I'll show you how to sew them to the garment. Let me give you this to look at. Okay, ready to go again. So what I did while I was away was I sewed the lips together. They're now kissing. And also on here, I gave it a good press so that this facing the stuff we posted through is now sitting flatter, and the seam allowances under here are now pressed along the crease. Yeah, like that. So that helps a lot. I mean, I am a bit lazy when it comes to pressing, but not when I'm doing fiddly dressmaking things. It really, really can't tell you how much difference it makes. It makes a big difference. And if I show you the other side now, you can see that we can hardly see that black at all. I mean, you will see a little bit of it, but you can hardly see it at all. What I also did on this side was I trimmed the edges down. They're just a bit longer than just a bit longer than the triangle in there, so that I can see my central line, because that's more important to me now than it was when we didn't put the letterboxing in. So goes on the central line. That goes on the central line. And now I've got to do the thing where I pick this up, I send the outer part of the garment out of the way, and I'm going to sew on, well, just to the right, just towards the seam allowance of that crease line. And you know, already it's moved because I didn't pin it or anything, can you see? What I like to do in these circumstances, because I do find that actually when you pin things, it does buckle up, especially with, I mean, this is quite fiddly, isn't it? Is that the pins don't necessarily stay exactly where you want them to. They also buckle the fabric, put bulges in the fabric, which makes it less accurate. So what I've got is a glue pen. Now this is not a Pritt stick, it is glue that is designed for this kind of purpose, and you can sew through it. It isn't going to gunk up your machine, it washes out when the garment washes out, but it just gives a temporary sort of fix to really help with keeping things in position. And I can't recommend these enough, but also I want to say again, it's not any old glue. Several brands do them. This happens to be a Soline pen. Prim do it. I'm sure Hemline will probably do one, but be really careful. Don't buy uncertain stuff from the Long River site. Okay, make sure it's a branded thing, and it's not fabric glue, because you can't necessarily sew through that. It's glue it's a glue pen that's designed for as an alternative to pins. So where I'm going to put this underneath is, it comes in different colours. I don't really know why, because actually it dries clear and then it washes out. But anyway, I've got blue one, you get yellow ones. So under here, I am going to, that's not very clear, is it? Can I bring it closer? I show you what I've got under here. There, so I've got a garment, I've got the bit of garment that's folded back as a seam allowance in the window, I've got the seam allowance that's folded back of the facing fabric, and I've got the big bit of facing. Now I'm going to sew my lips through there, but through all layers. So I need all of these 3 layers to not be wibbling about, basically, technical term. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some glue in between those 2 seam allowances, and I'm also going to put some glue this back onto there. I hope that made sense. So you can see me do it. So I'm going to open that up. Use a second. Open that up there. So this is my seam allowance for my garment fabric that's turned back. I'm just going to put a little bit of glue in there and press that back. So those 2 are now working like one piece of fabric. And then I'm going to do the same on here, and where we turned this back, keep it stuck down. I mean, you can pin it up here, you know, well, no, you can't pin it up here because you've got to get in there, haven't you? And that's the reason, yeah. I knew there was a reason I resorted to glue. Special glue, not your Pritt stick. Say that enough times. Okay. That's now stuck. Now this is now all working as one piece. So a bit like when we did it in class, I've got one piece of seam allowance, even though it has kind of extra bits attached to it here, and the outer garment. So what I'm going to do is sew my lips in there. Now I'm doing this by feel, because I can feel the edge of my lips and the edge, this edge here, I can feel it. So I can feel that they're together there, and I might even resort to the glue pen here as well. So basically it's an alternative to pinning, because I've got so many things they've got to be in the same place. it's a lot easier than pins. So I can feel under here, I can feel it with my fingers where the edge is. I'm also going to use my, where are we? My line this side to line up with the centre, and at the other end I've got one to line up with the centre. Press that down. Okay, and effectively, turn it over. That's it. That's, you know, that's where we're going to stitch. So what we're going to do now is just stitch that all together how I've glued it to make it stay. And this is much easier to handle now. I've not got lots of bits and layers all giving me grief. So I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to put the garment out of the way. So the garment's out of the way. I'm going to turn it over so that I can see where I need to sew. And I'm going to sew just to the right of that stitching there. If I hadn't put this lining in, it would be on that line. So if I show you this way round maybe. So just because the orientation sometimes is a bit confusing. So this is my top seam allowance. There's the seam allowance and everything attached to it. There are my lips attached to it, and I want to sew that on. So maybe the easiest thing for me to show you is if I turn that over to the right side of the garment like that, and I want to get the garment out of the way because I don't want to sew through the front of the garment like that, and there you can see the seam allowance under there. So I'm going to sew through all layers across that, and again I think it's probably better that I show you once I've stitched rather than twiddle around and try and get that camera to point at the sewing machine again. So you know what's coming. Back in a moment. Okay, I'm ready again. So I've sewn this at the top under here. I can get it up close to the camera. You can see the stitches are almost on top. Will it focus to show you? It's almost on top, but not quite. In a lot of places it looks like one big thick line because the stitches are right next door. That's how close, it's not focusing now, how close I want it to be. And then on the other side, so on the back, you can see the stitching through the lips. It's about 1/4 of an inch. Okay, now I'm going to do the same on the other side, and if I look at the back here I can see that my, where is it, there, central line is, the loads of threads lined up. And what I've got to be careful of though, if I turn it over, if I just think, oh, I'll just sew that along there now, easy peasy, it's very easy to end up with bits here, because this window here, even though it's got facing on, likes to bow a bit. It likes to bow because it's, you know, it's a hole. So what I need to do is I need to really make sure when I'm dealing with this side that these lips, the edge of these lips, are really up against that seam allowance under there that I can feel but can't now see because of the facing. Okay, I need to make absolutely certain that those are lined up so that, I'm just going to pop a pin in for a minute, see if we can demonstrate with a pin. I'm scared to turn it over live. Oh, there we go. See, no bagging, nice straight line. So you really have to be very mindful of that when you're doing this process. I'm going to take that pin out and glue it, because if I wanted to yeah, let's show you why I glue. So I've got that in the right place now. That pin is well positioned. I can see that it works well for me on this side, and now I want to stitch it down, imagine a row of pins there. Well, what I've got to do, if I turn it over to the right hand side, the right side of the garment, and pull this down, number one, my pin hasn't gone through all the layers. Number two, my pin's under there somewhere, I don't know where it is when I come to sew. And if I now take that pin out and put it on this side, things might have moved. So I'm not saying you mustn't pin or you shouldn't pin, but a little bit of hand tacking or gluing really is worth the effort. I've already glued that down, but I haven't glued. So I've glued the seam allowances together into the facing, but I haven't glued the lips to this. And again, I'm doing it by feel. I suppose what you could do is you could get a ruler and draw in where the 1/4 inch is so that you can see what's going on. Also, I say, if you have fabric that is transparent, you'll be able to see where it is. The only issue with getting transparent fabric that's the same colour as this, it can be tricky. But again, it's all, you know, what works for you, isn't it? Because if I look at this side, you can see the black, but not massively, and that's a completely different colour from the garment fabric, isn't it? So it depends, you know, the better you get, the more options you have to not do the right thing. Really? I didn't say that. So what I'm doing is I'm feeling under here where that seam allowance is as I'm pressing this down. Where is it? I'm also still keeping an eye on this line here, and I'm probably going to turn it over and have a quick look before I stitch it. This end's not looking so great. So what I'm doing is I'm just manipulating it a little bit and having a look from the front so that I'm happy with where it's going to sit, which also is easier with glues and pins. And I think it might take even just a little bit longer to sort that out for real. But that's, I mean, that is honestly not perfect, but as good as I've seen some not inexpensive manufactured garments. Right, so it's this side where I'm this bottom of the pocket area that I am going to be stitching now. I've got it where I want it, I've glued it in place, and I'm just going to turn it around so I can do the same thing for you. I'm going to move the garment out of the way and stitch through all layers here, just very tiny slightly towards the seam allowance from where the current stitching is. If you hadn't put the facing in, this would be on the line. It's quite quick, so this time I'm just going to let you listen to the sewing machine to prove that I really am doing it. Okay, so if I bring it back, what can you see? There's the back. This should look like the diagram in your documentation now. And there's the front with your lips in. So from there, I think we gathered that if we were going to put an inclusion on, like a pocket flap or whatever, it also goes on here. You're a bit better off now because you've got a line of stitching to help you work out where the seam allowance is. So your pocket inclusion would go on there. I'm just going to pretend it's a tab for the moment. Got a bit of orange fabric here, which we'll just pretend is a button tab, just to remind you. So again, this has got to go through all those layers, but now you've got more of an idea of where those layers are because you can see the stitching that you've just done. So I'm going to pop that in there. And what I'm doing behind that you can't see is pushing the garment away. and this time I'm going to sew it on this side because I want to see what's happening with this, but I've pushed the garment away and I know where I need to stitch because I can see the stitching on this side, so I'm going to stitch just a tiny bit further in that direction than the stitching I can see on this side, but the garment's out of the way. That's the important thing. Again, it's a couple of seconds. Excuse my blank mat while I just sew this on. I did a back stitch because it's not going all the way across the area. Here we go. I've sewn that tab on and it's sewn through all those layers but not the front of the garment. Okay, and it's sewn on so nicely close you can hardly see the stitches into there where it is. Okay. So that's that sewn on there. And then the other thing that we didn't get a huge amount of time to look at was the putting the pocket bag on. Let me just get rid of a few of these. It's a really good idea to kind of snip the threads as you go, because when you use a sewing machine, the sewing machine will look for two threads. It doesn't really care where they're coming from. It'll pick up the first two threads it finds and try and sew with them. So if you've got lots of dangly ends like this going on, then sometimes it will pick those up and you'll get a jam. What I haven't done, of course, is sewn these triangles in here. Yeah, so what I'm going to do now is just sew down that line there. What I've done is I've gone a back and forth a couple of times because it's a stress area. And again, what I've done there, you can see, I've gone right over it, you can hardly see it. Is it better on the other side? It's better on this side. So the pale stitching that you can see there, the pale, come on focus, the pale stitching which is the furthest this way, I don't know if you can see it. Is it better? Focus camera. Is the stitching from when the black fabric was letterboxed through, and then what I've done attaching this is gone very slightly to the right. And what you can see by having gone slightly to the right is that it appears on the right hand side. Can you see the little stitch in there? Okay. If you don't want that to happen, I've done that the wrong way around, what an idiot. What I was supposed to do was to get the garment out of the way and stitch that to that. Yeah. So you do what I showed you on the day and what I told you in the document, not what I've just done now. And the advantage, the thing about doing this, it's like getting the garment out of the way, isn't it? I did it from the wrong side. So if I had turned it over to the right side, pulled the garment out of the way, then what I would have been left with is this, and I sew beyond that stitching there across the point and through the stitching here, because then that also secures the ends of the stitching that you did sewing the lips on. So that's just me being an idiot. See, it happens to us all regularly. And I did stitch slightly to the right because there was stitching already there from the... So let me show you again. This stitch shouldn't be there, right? That stitching shouldn't be there. That's me having made a mistake. You send the garment out of the way. and stitch through what's left behind, okay, which is, in this case, an arrow, the triangle, the triangle seam allowance, the triangle seam allowance from the facing, and the facing, and the lips, going through all of that, but not through the front of the garment, because that would be silly, wouldn't it? Oh dear. So I've gone back and forth a couple of times. I've made sure that I've trapped in the lines that are the edges of the stitching that when we sewed the lips on. If I turn that over, you can see now that the stitching there that we didn't backstitch and the stitching there that we didn't backstitch has now been secured down by this process here. Whew, need a gin now. Okay, so from the front, this is what it looks like. And the next thing I'm going to show you is putting the pocket bag on. And I've moved so many things around in here to get the camera set up. Well, I don't know where the pocket bags are, so I'm just going to give you a little some hold music, don't I? I should compose some hold music and put it on. I'll be back in a moment. Okay, I have cut a pocket, and because I'm a glutton for punishment, I've made it a fabric that has a right and a wrong side. Just because actually it matters if you've got a fabric that's the right and the wrong side, so we may as well cover that while we're here. What I've done is while I was away faffing, I've stitched this fabric to all those layers. Remember this top layer here has got loads of things on it. It's got the inclusion on it, it's got the lips on it, it's got the facing on it, it's got the seam allowances on it. It's getting quite crowded up here now. Okay, and what I did is I laid the pocket down on top. If you could just see in there, you just see it, you just see the top of the lips and the inclusion. So I laid it down and stitched closer to the edge of that seam allowance this time. So I laid it all down, laid it on top, just like we've done everything else. Let's just go through. Laid it on top, just like I had done the lips, just like I had done the inclusion. Then I pinned this, actually, because it was less fiddly. I pinned this and I turned it over. And then what I did is I moved the garment out of the way and stitched through all layers. And if you look here, this line of stitching is a bit further away because what I decided to do with the pocket edge is just leave a bit more to give myself a bit of extra room. So the only difference that will make relating to the maths I gave you on the sheet is that I've now lost a little bit of pocket length. But if I wanted to leave myself a bit more there, you would just have to add that on when you calculate the pocket length. So I've probably encouraged you to line it up with the seam allowance and sew it again that way. But the process is the same. Lay it on top, turn it over, get the garment out of the way, stitch through all layers. Okay, and it's right sides down because when you open the pocket, if you put pretty fabric in there, you want to see the pretty bit, not the back of it. Okay, so through that hole you'll see the right side of the fabric. So the other end of the pocket, I'm just going to turn the whole thing round. This is the top of the garment. I'm going to turn the whole thing round and do the same with this edge on the bottom lip side. So what I've got here, here's my top, here's my tab inclusion, here's my bottom lip seam allowance, and we can tell where it is now despite this because it's all sewn down. We've got stitching lines to help us. You've got to make sure that this inclusion, whatever it is, pocket or tab, doesn't get caught up in this process. Here's my pocket. So what I've done is I've just, it's not my beam, is there? So there's the top of the garment where I sewed it, and I've just pulled it back out of the way so I can see all my bits and pieces in there. Get this out of the way. it might even be a good idea to pop a pin in there, do it from the back, or else it'll be a while before you can get hold of it again. Okay, so I've pinned that out of the way so it's not going to get caught up in anything, and I'm bringing round this other side of the pocket, this is the other end of that pocket flap, and I'm going to place it on there. I'm going to line this one up for you, on there. Make sure it's central, all those things. And again, we're going to remove the garment and sew through all the layers. So I'm going to do the pen again here. The pen, stick it down, so it's quicker for you to watch as well. Okay, so if I turn the garment to the right hand side, that's going to stay because it's glued down to the right hand side. This is what it looks like. Yeah, my pocket is all up in the wrong place at the moment because I want to get the edge of it along this seam allowance. So I'm going to get the garment out of the way and sew through all layers. So this is the bottom of the pocket. This is upside down now. It's the bottom of the pocket. I've got my seam allowances with the facing letterbox fabric. I've got the lips and the edge of the pocket on there. And I'm going to sew through all layers. And let me just go away and sew that. So that little break included changing a bobbin. So let's have a look then at what I've done. So there's the stitch line, and the important thing here is that I've stitched all the way. The garment was out of the way, and I stitched all the way across from one end to the other on this side, so that I could see where my seam allowance is. Stitched right from there all the way to there. And now, when I twiddle things around, I've got my lips all beautiful. On the back, I've got pocket attached up here and pocket attached down here. This is my pocket, but at the moment, my pocket has holes in the side. So I'm going to sew those up, and I'm going to sew them through this little bit at the side, which gets a lot of jip, doesn't it? So I'm going to move the garment out of the way. I turn it over. It's not what I always do, but actually for illustration purposes it helps, doesn't it? So I'm turning the garment to the right hand side like that. I'm getting my garment out of the way, and you can see through here I'm also getting rid of all these threads because my sewing machine will find them and try to sew with them. It's something a lot of beginners, they get their sewing machine in a knot, they don't understand what's happened, and that's usually what's happened. I've not been bothered to chop the threads off. So I'm going to sew now. Can you see here all these? Let me see. Can you see all these lines of stitching here? That's the pocket. That's the lips. On the other side of the triangle, you've got stitching where the lips go on. So I'm going to back stitch at this end, and I'm going to sew all the way from the tallest thing I've got. Back stitch all the way down through this fabric, which is a whole other subject as how much you trim and when, but anyway, it's there, so I'm just going to use it all the way through there, all the way through there, all the way through there, right to this is the end of my pocket that's folded, and back stitch it at that end. So if I give you the faffing screen again for a moment, I'll sew both of those up, and then I can show you what it looks like, and hopefully it will have made some sense to you. Okay, so a bit of faffing going on. Right then, the big reveal. Here we go. Here's the front. Here's the back with the pocket bag. Don't forget I put a pin in here. That was to stop my tab or my inclusion, whatever it was, pocket flap getting caught up in the stitching area. I need to take that out. I've got pockets which are now sealed. Focus, camera, focus. Yeah, there and there. Can't see the stitching on that side, but I promise you they are. You'd want to finish these. I mean, quite often I would just overlock or zigzag or pick and shear around the edge of the pocket before I started, so that it's not got raw edges everywhere. But in the real world now, what would happen is that you would normally have some sort of lining in there, which covers all of these tatty edges. I've got a pair of trousers that are not fully lined, but what they have done is they've lined. What they did with the top of the pocket is they had more material at the edge of the top of the pocket and they trapped it in the waistband, so it effectively lined all this area under here with all these raw edges. So that's always a thought. So there's my pocket, there's my lips, which are stitched together still, and in there is my little tab, and everything is completely enclosed and attached to this. But I unpicked that stitching that I did, I was so cross with it. There's no stitching on the outside. Let's unpick this pocket lips, although I did do it with small stitches, not the big stitches that I taught you to do it with, because, you know, it's Saturday, I've got other things to do. Okay, so I'm unpicking this, perhaps not as gently as I might, and not as easily as I would, because normally there would be far fewer stitches in there. Opening my pocket out, it's probably not big telly either, is it really? I would never, ever, ever be that rough with a proper garment, I promise you, even though, you know, I said I'm not a couturist, as it were. I would never, ever do that, so this is just because it's a sample. So peeping in there, look, you see my little pocket inclusion? Here he is. Tab out, with a button on maybe, and I've got some pretty pocket fabric in there. The pretty fabric thing, just as a final note really, the pretty fabric thing, it isn't usually the whole pocket, because the pretty fabric is usually slightly thicker than the whole pocket, pocket fabric, and it would make it really bulky. So sometimes what happens is the pocket flap isn't all one fabric, it'll have a band of something nicer towards the top, and then you sew the nice fabric on here, and then by the time you get to about here there's a seam, and it's the sort of lighter weight pocket fabric from there round the other side. There's a whole other thing for you to think about. So I hope that that's cleared up some of the things we didn't have time for on the day, and you know, contact me if it hasn't really. And thank you for your patience with very non-professional video making with phone cameras and very little knowledge. So if you want to show me what you've done, that's really great as well. And one last time, that's it. And just to prove that I am actually here, really. So you can remember what my face looks like. There you go. I hope that's been good for you. Give me a shout if you've still got queries. Okay, bye.